to have a masterclass today with our presenter, Jackie Burney. We also have at the end of our meeting today a verbal presentation on TRIM by our colleagues Kim Borman and Junior Ebanks, and Jeanette and myself will give an update on one or two other matters coming up. Those of you who are our regular attenders for our bi-monthly meetings will have seen from the agenda that there are a few new items coming up, and I will talk about those at the end. Today's recording and presentation by Jackie McBurney will be recorded, but it will just be the presentation only. There'll be an opportunity for Q&A after, and we're going to manage this by asking you to raise your hands and or place your question. It's in the chat box, and my colleagues and myself will consider the chat box and place them before Jackie. And I do thank my colleagues, Carol, Alison and Mark, who'll be helping Jeanette and myself with that today. The meeting's due to end at 1 o'clock. And when it does conclude, the team will remain online for anyone who has any matters that they'd like to discuss in a more quieter environment or anything that they would like to raise. Is there anything further that you'd like to add, please, Jeanette? Okay, then. So without further ado, I'm going to kindly invite our presenter, Jackie McBurney, to introduce herself. Jackie, we're able to share your slides if you find that your IT is not cooperating. We do ask everyone to place themselves on mute and also to minimize their cameras so that we can look at the presentation on the shared screen. So over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Penny, and thank you for inviting me today, everybody. So my name's Jackie McBurney. I am the founder and chair of the NHS England Menopause Network. We now around 400, but only recently have our provider colleagues found out that we exist. So we do welcome all members across the NHS if anybody would like to join or dip in for resources, support or moaning. We're very good at all of those things in the network. I have a clinical background. I am registered as a nurse, but I have to say at the outset, my speciality is emergency care, not menopause. Although I know things about the menopause I never wanted to know. So I am going to try to, I'm going to see if my screen will share from beginning. Is that?
Yes, that has displayed. Wonderful. Would you like to make it bigger?
Let's see how does that work better?
Yeah, that's a fraction bigger. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you go a bit bigger, Jackie? Can it enlarge any more?
Let's have a little.
For everyone on the call, if you hold down CTRL and press the minus key on your keyboard, that'll adjust the ratio of the images so that the presentation enlarges and that people's streams get smaller. CTRL and plus obviously takes it in the opposite direction.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to walk through the menopause and why it's important for all of us at work to be aware of the impact of a menopause and to be clear exactly what the menopause is and what it means. Happy to take questions as Penny said through the presentation. So the menopause is poorly understood. It's often understood as an older lady thing that happens and it involves hot flushes. So the menopause could really be described as three discrete things. The menopause is one day when the periods have ceased to happen for 12 months consecutively. And that will happen because the ovaries stop maturing eggs. So this is really a better description would be an ovarian insufficiency, and that then takes us out of the space of gender. So anybody born with ovaries will experience an issue related to that ovarian insufficiency around eggs development. All of the time after that single day is postmenopause. And that can be involving all of the same symptoms for any number of years, just the same as the time before it. And that time before it we call the perimenopause, and that's usually the years where the body's changes start to be noticed by the individual experiencing them. So things like lower mood, increasing anxiety are often misunderstood and not considered to be part of the menopause. So a lot of your colleagues...
Can I interrupt a moment? Sorry to be rude. It's Lisa Shire here. I'm one of the consultants in Winchester. But the we're not seeing the slides, and
yes, if you could kindly rotate your slides, please. Is that okay?
Is it possible to press slideshow as well, please? Because then I think
it should be. It's on my screen. Would it be helpful if Carol could share, and then...
Yes, we'll share.
Showing it's actually showing fine on mine. So sorry.
Okay, let's share it for you then, and you can say next slide, please. Yeah,
might be easier.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
IT challenges. So second slide in. So there we go.
Lovely. Thank you so much to all.
That's better. So that's great. Thumbs up. Everyone can see that. So this stage of perimenopause often masks a lot of other things like general tiredness, low mood, feeling exhausted, and just that kind of stage when things start to happen that can be very, very discreetly coming on board, can last a few years, and often is why it's not always picked up as perimenopause. So that's important to know. Next slide, please. So as I say, menopause is often poorly understood, and that's because largely of generations before that didn't feel comfortable talking about menopause, and still to some extent different cultures don't feel comfortable talking about menopause, different age groups, and it was always portrayed in the media as something that affected older ladies and involved hot flushes, and the pictures of ladies with a fan was kind of, you know, the common picture. That isn't the case. And what we know is that for any number of reasons, things like surgical hysterectomies, cancer treatments, and various other interventions that can happen, and natural circumstances can result in a menopause much, much younger than that. So in effect, some of our colleagues, some of our family members will have that menopause period extending from 30s into 60s, and will actually be affected by that change in that state and all of the symptoms associated for a longer length of time than they were when they were fertile. So this is actually both a social issue as well as being something that we need to manage around our colleagues' well-being at work. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do is offer you the chance to see the impacts of some of this and the comments that some of our colleagues have made in relation to the various symptoms and the severity of some of those symptoms. So as many as 1 in 3 individuals will have symptoms so severe that it does affect their workplace well-being and their overall health. And that isn't hot flushes. And in fact, one of the very early surveys I completed with the network was to ask our network members how they felt and how they'd experience things around their menopause journey. And some of them, as many as 4%, I had 500 responses. 4% of those is actually a reasonable number, said that their line manager was the source of those insensitive comments they found hardest to take. So this is quite a big deal. This is not funny. And it does affect our confidence at work. Yes, headaches, brain fog. I see the comments coming into the chat box there. This is something that affects us in terms of organisational reshuffles, going for new jobs, going for promotions, all of those things, just getting through the day. It can be quite severe. Next slide, please. So in terms of organisational structure, it makes good sense. At the crudest level, it's good business sense to look after the workforce and as an output, retain them. So more women than records began are in the workplace. That's a fact. We also know as an NHS, we are hugely reliant on women in the workforce and anyone that doesn't necessarily recognise as a woman, but will have experience of this. We know that our cohorts are heavily dependent on that age group there that would be most affected, 45 to 64. Over a million women work in the NHS. And the issue, obviously, as I've mentioned, to be totally inclusive, does affect any of our colleagues who don't necessarily recognise as female, but were born with ovaries. And we need to recognise that as an increased sensitivity in this kind of place, because that has to be even more difficult for our colleagues to raise. Thank you. Next slide, please. So also highlighted more than any other time, the female section of our, more females saying that during lockdown, they took the brunt of caring responsibilities, homeschooling, juggling their job. So we know that we've had a heightened period there that exacerbated some of those issues. This is typical of, you know, a lot of the squeezed middle cohort between 45 and 64 that will have older family relatives and potentially teenagers or older parents to look after. We know we have a problem with recruitment that hasn't been resolved with changes in EU recruitment systems. We know that we have a problem with retention across our clinical workforce, as well as our non-clinical workforce as well, that do an amazing job to support all of the NHS flow. We know that the British Medical Association at the end of 2019 found in their survey that they have a problem retaining senior doctors and recruiting them at the levels they need, and the penny dropped for those guys, even in the BMA, where they said we're never going to achieve the equality pay gap. And it is, yes, it is a good point, the sandwich generation. So we know that retention and attrition is an issue, and we know that this group are also the most experienced and the mentors and trainers and educators, even if we can recruit. So this is actually good business sense. Next slide, please. And just to highlight the point about regional data, I'm sure you guys will have your own local data. I think this is now a little bit more than a year old because I got it just before we started locking down, but it does show you that squeezed cohort there of the female workforce that we actually rely on. And I see some of the comments, yeah, not sleeping, flexible working, all of those policies that we need to be mindful of. It's debilitating in some regards. So that data breakdown there is helpful for you guys to look at What does my system look like? What support do I need? And have I got an issue here in terms of the leadership and a visible strategy for what we do with menopause? Next slide, please. So this just refers back to that earlier survey that I looked at. 84% of my 500 people responding had problems at work. That's a big issue. 34% took time off, and this is not a one-off. This is repeated, going off with stress, putting it down to other things. Thankfully, since October last year, NHS England now collect menopause-related sickness, and that's important. Some regions we know are outliers in this field. And obviously back to say, and I noted an earlier comment that line managers don't always support or have any awareness of this issue. My network I started it because I was advised by my female manager, who was 51, that I suggested I go to Orchid Health and get some sort of support and further help for myself. And my answer to that, her answer to that was that if I didn't feel I could do my job, then Orchid Health would have to be the answer. Hence why we're here having this conversation. So next slide, please. As I can imagine, a bolshy nurse hearing that didn't go down well. So in 2019, after that initial survey, I decided to look at, is there a gap between our primary healthcare support offer and hearing all the horror stories about some GPs being less aware than others and some GPs declining to prescribe HRT when there wasn't a clinical rationale, all of those horror stories, and then balancing that with what did we offer in terms of the organisation Orchid Health offer, and was there a gap there, considering that I was hearing people saying, I'm going off sick, I'm going off sick. I can't control this. I looked at what was available, and I happened to meet the former chair of the British Menopause Society, a wonderful specialist nurse called Kathy Abernethy, and she is the clinical director for a service called Peppy Health. And I persuaded our women's network to fund a small pilot. That pilot was a fantastic result. We had unfettered access across the pilot to menopause support specialist nurses. And they were at the end of the phone, they were texting via an app, and they were physically available on calls, offering support, reviewing symptoms. Where did you get help from? What do you need? What clinical support do you need? And basically one-to-one with those individuals. Next slide, please. And what we found was that although the rate of reporting of symptoms was really, really high in terms of the level of bothersomeness that those individuals experienced, and the rate that they'd taken off sick, after the pilot, they felt supported. They felt that the symptoms, they had more strategies to manage the symptoms. And in some instances, their medication had been totally changed. Their method of taking their medication had been changed. And they had more techniques on board to manage where they didn't choose medication as well. So it wasn't just about HRT for all. So as a result of that pilot, we decided that the NHS England team gave permission to formally commission Peppy Health as well. Next slide, please. So at the end of this piece of work, we now have finally, last week, just approved and finalised our policy. That should be going to publication towards the end of this week or beginning of next. We have a training education package to go alongside that in a slide deck, so I can share that. That can go out as well if anyone would like it. And we also have a commitment for Peppy Health for staff. so that it's in addition to our Rocky Health, and it's self-referral, so that any staff with a line manager they feel doesn't understand or they don't want to discuss those really sensitive issues, they can self-refer. They don't need to justify, they don't need to share their gender, they don't need to get permissions for that service. So that's fantastic commitment, and it offers that bounded approach that's a formal recognition of this. My details are on there. Very, very happy. Yeah, Dr. Newson is very good, and Dr. Newson has a menopause, the Balance app as well. That's free app to download. The difference with the Balance app is that there's no body at the end of it saying, how did you get on Friday? How did that work for you? Did that strategy work? Did you check it out, the information I gave you? Or did you change the patch? How is it doing? That's the difference with this service. It's unfettered access to a nurse. So just to make that really clear. But Dr. Newson's website does have loads of great advice and information. So I think that's probably it from me, guys. I'm going to ask if we can stop sharing. And oh, hello, Catherine's already shared her conversation with Peppy. I think the aspect of Peppy is probably helpful to say that it's most useful to discuss a larger footprint with something like Peppy, although we have an NHS rate negotiated. It's actually cheaper than our a couple of sessions of our talking therapy, but not everybody has a wellbeing budget or commitment from an organisation to secure something like that. So I'm happy to help any conversations that would be interested. Any questions?
Thank you very much.